The Bruac scout threw up violently into his respirator as soon as he set foot on the icy surface of Hades 9. Sergeant Coral was horrified to see the rookie's helm's inner glass hiss with acidic bile. The issue wasn't rookie, or whatever the Bruac military caste slang term was for that term. No one had anticipated that Hades 9, an icy world assigned by the high clutch for long-range cannon placement and mineral reclamation, would smell like frozen fish bones and fermenting sulfur. More significantly, no one had anticipated that it would be occupied. Their long-range probes had shown a bare surface, geological activity that grew like bones under ice, and an average surface temperature so low that blood thickened like syrup. This world was death in glacial form, but Coral had guided hundreds of drops into frontier areas, including deserts, storms, and even a live forest at one point. Like razors, cold winds scoured the lowlands. Technically, the air could be breathed, but only if you didn't mind your lungs being ice cold from the inside after 12 minutes without filtration. The Bruac was more perplexed by the boots than by the temperature. Less than an hour after takeoff, the first set had emerged a trail of prints that were too symmetrical to be quadruped or avian. They resembled Bruac boots, uncannily, although they were smaller and more useful. Intercutting pathways that had been eroded into ruts close to cliff walls, the pattern repeating in loops. This place had been inhabited by someone or something. The first drone had vanished by then. Coral had advanced into a system of crevasses with a Widoscan recon drone, exactly 30 seconds after plunging into the gap. The drone footage fell silent with no crash, no warning, and no signal disturbance. No black box, no wreckage, not even a heat trail had been discovered by the retrieval drone. Coral dismissed it at the time, but now, as they hiked up an ice ridge, with the wind clawing at their suits and the faint sound of metal echoing in the distance, he wasn't so sure. Lieutenant Verikic, who was older than most and twice as cynical, said, "This place wasn't empty. It just didn't want to be seen." The pipe was the next oddity. Age-blackened, it protruded like a bone from the icy slope. Heat stress caused the metal to distort somewhat. It was probably a vent or heated exhaust, but none of the Bruac could identify the source. Someone was still down there, below the surface, pumping out warm air from some subterranean structure or mine. A shelter because the ice had thickened around it but not over it. Veric knelt next to the pipe and scraped off some of the ice. "It's human tech," he said in a nearly spitting voice. "Old, too, second-wave colony era. They use these to vent geothermal bunkers." "That's impossible," Coral said. "They did," Veric said solemnly, "but the humans never came out this far." The last records from Terra Expansion Core dated back nearly 180 cycles. At that time, Earth's governments were throwing colonies into void sectors like seeds in the hopes that some would take root. Many failed, a few vanished. The assumption was always the same: no resources, no rescue, no survivors. However, if this vent was operational, Corell ordered the platoon forward. They followed the ridge, passing another cluster of strange shapes pipes, vents, and one strange array of vertical rods arranged in a perfect spiral, coated in ice but clearly manufactured. A signal array, perhaps. Perhaps even a defense net. In any case, too planned to be natural. Just before dusk, they discovered the first body. It wasn't Bruac. The skull was too round. The armor, if armor could still be called that, was patched with odd fabrics and stitched leather. Frost had grated almost all of it. Human, a dead one, at least 50 cycles dead, based on the corrosion on the gear. His arms curled around a cylindrical object, some sort of crude furnace. And what shocked Bruac more than the corpse in this frozen nightmare was what surrounded it. A rough perimeter of Frokerl didn't like the way Bereric spoke. They held this line. Against whom, he mumbled, as he examined the situation. Commanders stiffened when they discovered dozens of weak signals and heat bloomsome linear. Some vertical, some stationary, too warm for ambient. There were no clear shapes, but enough to prove one terrifying possibility. Someone was still alive down there. Not us, Beric said. Not yet, they continued. This time, drones flew higher and wider, and Coral used ground scanners to track motion beneath the ice. We make contact, Coral ordered. It was not a suggestion. They followed the valley down into what looked like a natural basin. Wind roared louder here, as though funneled through invisible tunnels. Ice cliffs towered above them like jagged walls. At the bottom sat a dome-like shape, half buried in snow. Coral sent Veric and 2 scouts to circle it, watching for traps. That's when the lights came on. Not Brulight's human ones. A dull orange glow beneath the snow line flickered to life, casting a warm hue against the pale blue shadows of ice. A vent hissed. A doorway, long since buried, ground open with a mechanical whine, and standing in it was a man-human, alive, breathing in the toxic air like it was nothing. He wore no helmet, just a beard, cracked goggles, and a patchwork coat made from fur. Scavenged gear, and what looked like part of a military tent. In one hand, he held a metal spear. In the other, a mug of something steaming. He raised the mug in lazy salute. As if greeting neighbors, he replied, "Evening," and then, calmly, he continued, "You boys lost." Coral stared. Veric's jaw clicked shut with effort. This wasn't a ghost colony. This was a home. The humans sipped from his mug, gathered Bruac soldiers like they were a mild annoyance, not a landing squad armed with full tactical gear. "Storm, we'll pick up soon," he added. "Better come in before your suits freeze solid. You didn't bring heat packs, did you?" No one answered. The man didn't wait for an invitation. He turned his back and disappeared into the glowing opening behind him. A moment later, the doorway remained open, warm air visibly curling outward. Into the frozen air, teasing them with the scent of something unfamiliar. Meat, smoke, dust. Carol glanced at Veric. The veteran shrugged, then waved the squad forward. They followed. The entrance tunnel was rough, not crude, just repurposed. Everything from piping to walkways had clearly come from other colonies, older outposts, or even Bruac's salvage. Old Terran design, layered with handcrafted fixes, welding marks, and mismatched steel ran the length of the corridor. Despite the wear, the interior was warmer than any of them expected, not just in temperature. It felt lived in, used. They emerged into what looked like a communal hall, long tables, a stove fashioned from a melted shuttle engine, hanging lights powered by something deep beneath the base, and everywhere signs of habitation, racks of gear, handmade boots, ropes, snow axes, tools, and human men. A dozen of them at least, all rising slowly from their seats or bunks, each one as weathered and ragged as the first. Some had beards down to their chests, others wore goggles or wrapped scarves. One stirred something in a massive pot without. Looking up, another reloaded what looked like a harpoon rifle in the corner. All watched the Bruac. The first man, the one with the mug, spoke again. "So, visitors, are you from another conquest run or a mining crew?" Coral took a hesitant step forward and said, No territorial chart has you on it. This planet has been marked for the installation of weaponry and Bruac reclamation. He placed the mug on a shelf next to a row of leather gloves and said, "My name is Harrow. This is Station 12, founded 173 years ago. Abandoned by the outer colonies, forgotten by the inner ones, and apparently skipped by your precious invasion logs. You survived here. This world is classified as lethal to unmodified humanoids," Varick inquired. "That's generous," Harrow muttered. "It is lethal. We just got used to dying slower." He sat on a crate and gestured for the Bruac to do the same. No one moved, and the other humans remained silent. However, one of them threw an extra log into the fire, and the crackling heat filled the silence, which was incomprehensible to Coral. The temperature outside would kill an unarmored in minutes, and the winds were sharp enough to expose skin. "How many of you are there?" Varick asked. "Here," he inquired. 17, counting the lower tunnels," Harrow shrugged. "Others in the ice valleys, others farther north. After the 100th funeral, we stopped keeping official numbers near the old wrecks. And your food supply?" A voice off in the corner said, "We hunt." It came from a younger man with a red gun across his knees and a chapped face. "You ever see the herders that roam the geothermal cliffs? Big pale things with 6 legs and tusks like mining drills. We trap them, smoke the meat. It keeps fine for weeks." Coral sighed. "But you're not hostile." Harrow tilted his head. "You make weapons when we need them, engaged in warfare." "No," Harrow stated bluntly, "just survival." An uneasy movement was made by one of the Bruac scouts. "You landed on our ice. You set drones through our canyons. You flew over bunkers built by our fathers' fathers. What does your definition of hostile look like?" None of the people appeared scared, but none of them had raised a weapon. Not one. With a gloved hand close to the flames, Varick took a step towards it. Harrow stared up at the ceiling as if recalling a storm, and asked, "How did you survive the solar collapse cycles?" "This region lost all seasonal variants. We went deeper, found old tunnels from the dig crews, tapped magma veins, salvaged reactor shells, built airlocks, used snowpack to insulate. Lost a few, gained new ideas. And Earth," Coral said. It was difficult to understand the flatness of Harrow's voice as she said, "No support, no signal. Earth stopped listening a long time ago." The man stirring the kettle said, "Some of us still send pings, but if there is a response, we haven't heard it. Doesn't matter anymore. We built our own way. This world tried to kill us, and we killed it right back. No brag, just fact." Coral's gaze traveled over the room. Here, there were no ships, no air support, no fabrication hubs, and no central power grid. However, every tool appeared sharp, every bunk was spotless, and every firearm was carefully stored. These were now residents rather than survivors. Varick questioned, "Why didn't your ancestors evacuate?" "Some did, some tried. Others stayed. The storms kept us grounded, then the years just passed. We learnt the rhythms of the ice, the hum of the wind, the cracks in the snow before a quake. Eventually, we stopped hoping for extraction. It was just life." Coral stopped talking for a while. The Bruac soldiers said nothing. Harrow took another sip from his mug. Coral's response surprised even himself. "So you boys, setting up shop, looking to share or take. No threat, no fear, just a quiet question. We came expecting to find nothing. Now we have to report that something here still breathes." Harrow gave a small grin. The Bruac was still inside the bunker 3 hours later, not because they wanted to, but because the storm had arrived. Then welcome to Hades 9. The wind was harsh, dry, and swift at first. Then came distant bangs that sounded like antiquated artillery, followed by the moaning of ice sheets. Thick curtains of snow blasted sideways, pounding like fists against the dome's sealed door. Coral watched frost form fractal spirals as it ascended the reinforced glass near one of the viewports. Harrow was standing next to him. According to the man, a strip of smoked meat will not stop smoking for a day or two. You'll become scenery if you leave now. He didn't turn away, but Coral didn't respond either. Bruac's warriors behind them had shed their outermost armor, temporarily comforted by the human shelter's warmth. They continued to move rigidly and erratically, not quite trusting them. One knelt by the heater and gazed into the flames, while another adjusted his visor settings. The people, on the other hand, were composed, practiced, but not particularly amiable. One of them used a stone block to sharpen the head of a spear, while another unloaded tiny compressed gas cartridges into what appeared to be a weaponized cobbled-together ice drill. Varric looked at a big map that was laid out on a metal table. It was incredibly intricate, hand-drawn, and partially faded. Hades 9's topography was shown in stark relief, with cliffs, vents, gulches, abandoned mining routes, and habitation areas identified by symbols that could only be understood by the people. He inquired, "You mapped this by foot?" A man with a patched patch over one eye and an iron-grey beard asked, "Every line." Varric didn't inquire more. "We call that West Ridge the Bone Trail. You'll know why if you hike it. Weather, geography, survival skills, and food storage were the only topics of discussion. Politics and galactic affairs were kept brief and factual. If empires had ever been important to these men, it had long since faded from their blood. At last, Coral looked out the window. Harrow raised one eyebrow and asked, "How do you prevent internal collapse?" "Your colony," asked Coral. Harrow chewed and then swallowed, saying, "No hierarchy, no code, no visible command. You seem to follow a loose structure. Every man here earned his place. We don't do ranks, we do usefulness. That sounds unstable. Only if you're soft." Coral got closer. "We have measured your surroundings. There are geothermal cavities beneath this valley, deep ones. Dangerous. Why build here?" "Because it's warm and because it's hidden," Harrow said, while leaning on a nearby beam. "We figured long ago the galaxy might come knocking. Didn't want to be found too easily, yet here we are." "Yeah," Harrow replied. "You got lucky." Suddenly, a low, vibrating hum filled the air. One of the humans twisted a dial on a device that resembled a chunk of rusty alloy. There was a faint chime. "That's the seismic net," the man with the grey beard stated. "Northvent just let out pressure." Coral questioned, "Any risk?" Harrow gave a headshake. Torv, a Bruac scout, said, "Not unless you're standing on it." Harrow smiled crookedly and said, "Your technology is inconsistent primitive systems, advanced monitoring. Why the mix? You make do when a sensor array fails. We wire up kitchen timers. When a reactor sputters, we bleed heat into side vents. Some of our best repairs started as mistakes. The trick is learning to keep them from killing you." Coral lowered his arms. When we fall, there was no drama in the words, just the dryness of someone repeating a continuous reality. "You operate like a wartime trench. That's not far off. The only difference is no one's coming to replace us." He saw a buzz coming from Coral's gauntlet. Static when he tapped it, followed by a weak Signalan orbital feed reconnecting. There was a tiny weakening of the storm's interference, not enough to speak or extract. Coral took a step back and adjusted the signal even more. Varric, meantime, moved slowly in the direction of the shelter's rear wall. There was a mural etched into the alloy itself, tucked between two steel lockers. Names, faces, and objects of peopler history inscribed without ceremony. One man clutching a weapon, another gazing into a storm cloud, and a youngster with a sledge. Maybe stories or memorials. Beside him stepped the older man with the eye patch. We add to it after each death. No tombs. Tombs don't last out here. Wind erases them. Ice swallows them. But memory sticks. One picture caught Varric's attention. A man with a flare held high over his head while ice shattered beneath his feet. He inquired what happened to him. Saved a scout team during a tunnel collapse. Stayed above ground. Bought time. The ice took him. Coral came back from his call 3 minutes later. We're being ordered to scan deeper, he stated. Harrow remained silent as he remarked, your geothermal pockets may be of interest to our command. You will provide access to the tunnel network. Harrow exhaled deeply and rested his head against the wall. You're asking politely, so I'll answer. We'll take you down. You won't like it. Why not? Inquired Coral. He pushed off the wall and picked up a bag from the floor, saying, because it gets colder, not warmer, and some of the things buried in that ice aren't metal. Creatures, number history. You want to learn why this colony is still alive. Then come see where the dead ones are buried. Over many generations, the tunnel was excavated by hand and machine, descending at a constant angle. With lanterns rigged from scavenged technology, the Bruac squad trailed after Harrow, 3 of his men. The walls dripped gently, as if the planet itself still grieved through its frozen surface, and the light created flickering shadows on them. With each step, Coral felt the weight of the ice above them. To Torvik, what's that sound? The creaking, said Harrow. That's just the ice shifting. Always shifting. It groans when it remembers who's walking on it. Everyone was silent. Walls altered as they descended farther. Simple rock and frost were used initially, followed by outdated pipes and strengthened supports. After a while, the husk of what appeared to be pieces of an old crawler merged with the tunnel structure. Then the painted symbols appeared, black and red patterns that flaked off the metal like old warning signs. According to Harrow, old colony marks were used in the absence of communications. You painted where you went so the next guy could find. Your bones? Coral took note of them all. Spirals, flames, and circles with slashes. He pointed to a smudge that looked like a crooked Y with lines across the stem and said, "What's this one?" Harrow studied it for a moment. That's the mark of silence. Means someone went in and nothing came out. Ever went silently for another. 20 meters. The corridor then led to a large, naturally occurring room that had partially collapsed but had been strengthened and sculpted throughout time. As the humans dispersed, their lights revealed something surprising. Steel lockers, crates, caskets, rows of stacked goods, and, farther away, a wall etched with names, hundreds of names. Harrow continued, "This is our root fault," in a hushed voice. "Every man who died above ground has a place down here. We ran out of room long ago, so now we store the memory." Varric walked over to the names wall, looking at each row. Each one was identified only by their names and a few brief sentences, such as lost in Bent, 6 fell during storm, and 3 held the north line. Coral moved closer. He stopped close to a huge slab that was black-marked and part metal. And half rock. Harrow moved next to him and asked, "What happened here?" "That was the fusion burst when the old reactor blew. 24 died, keeping the collapse from swallowing the ridge. They used their own bodies to plug coolant leaks." Coral remained silent. Harrow said, "You wanted to know why we're still alive," without being rude. He turned and pointed to a group of sealed crates on the other side, saying, "Because the dead kept buying us time, long enough for the next idea to work. And there's the real reason we survived." The Bruac moved cautiously closer. Harrow unlocked one of the cartons, and it hissed. Tiny black rods, encased in foil and insulated, hummed softly inside. With a start, Varick asked, "Biothermal cells, human-made?" Harrow commented, "We made these 2 decades ago," and nodded. "Reverse engineered from scraps. We grow them now." "Modified bacteria eats frost, outputs heat energy." "Farming?" asked Coral. "Enough to heat the shelters, cook, run lights. The old colonies sent us here to terraform and forgot us, so we terraformed anyway, just for ourselves." The officers of Bruac looked at one another. Once more, Coral's gauntlet pinged. He replied. Now there was complete signal to the orbital command center. Orders awaited. The weather had cleared, while the voice crackled with requests to protect the geothermal site, evaluate the colony's resource potential, and relay scans. He listened silently and without responding. An order to either absorb or eliminate was then given at the end of the message. Harrow said, "What'll it be?" Coral remained still, and the only sound in the chamber was the creak of shifting ice above. Varick was the first to speak. If Command knew what was down here, they'd send a larger force, strip it bare, classify it. They wouldn't understand it. No, Varick nodded in agreement with Harrow, and that makes it dangerous. Kill gazed at the man next to him, whose coat was tattered. His hands were cracked from the cold, and his eyes were heavy with age. This man should have died generations ago, but he was standing there as proof of something that even the brewer couldn't match. Sustained adaptation in harsh environments without outside assistance. Coral inquired, "You still send messages to Earth?" Coral hesitated before continuing, saying, "Send ... Harrow blinked. "You're sure? Every year, same time, same signal. Never get a response." "I'll delay the report," Coral said. "Long enough for you to be heard," Varick continued, "and we'll tell Command. The site is unstable, dangerous, too cold for construction, nothing of value." Harrow walked up to Coral and whispered, "You could have claimed the site." But the humans only nodded as they headed back up the tube without saying thank you. "Then you beat us here, and you beat the world itself," Coral said, delaying her response. "That garners some respect." "Do you ever consider staying?" Harrow inquired, not in jest. Coral didn't respond, but he felt something little and ancient when they came out into the dome and saw that the storm had passed and that the icy stars were hanging over the ice like silent judges. "You ever want to come back?" he continued. "Bring heat packs and a real coat." The shuttle was ready, and the Bruac started boarding. Harrow stood in the snow, one palm up in a silent farewell. In the viewport, the colony shrank to a mere dot in the ice as the shuttle took off, but Coral would remember it because, for the first time in all their conquests on all their hostile worlds, they had discovered a people who were stronger and colder than the planet they stood on.